Well, we're back here at the Hall of History, and today we're going to take a brief look at the war in Europe and some of the tactics being used. Well, one of the problems we briefly mentioned with the sinking of Lusitania earlier was that when you're trying to get war material and then, excuse me, across the ocean, the Germans had the U-boats, and the U-boats were sinking vast amounts of merchant ships and military ships and so forth. So at this time, about 1917, as America entered the war, the convoy system was introduced, and that was a way to protect the merchant ships. And as you can see from here, what ended up happening was you had destroyers really in on the perimeter of the convoy. Get rid of this. And you also had some destroyers in the middle. And the convoy ships would be really protected on all sides, as you look at this, on all sides from the U-boats. And this vastly improved the chances of the convoys making it across the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the U-boats out here. And that was one, excuse me, one way that the material got across the ocean. Another one that was used, mines were also used, especially near Great Britain, to keep the U-boats from sinking the Allies' merchant marine fleet. Well, probably the greatest or infamous tactic of World War I, it really just relegated itself to trench warfare. We talked a little bit about trench warfare during the American Civil War, during the Battle of Richmond, when the Confederate Army just entrenched themselves in, and it took the Yankee forces, the Union forces, it cost them a lot of men to overcome this. Well, by this time of the war's been going on since 1914, and both sides employed these trenches. And as you can see from the diagram here, these were just not foxholes, if you will, but these were very engineered trenches that allowed the troops to stay safe, and really just kept the war as a meat grinder, if you will, on both sides. What you had, if you look at the picture here, you really had these trenches on either sides of the front. So this would be either the Allies or the Axis side, and this would be the opposite side. And you had these very intricate trenches here so the troops could stay safe. And the interesting part was this whole idea called the no man's land. And this was the land in between the two trench systems. And you see the barbed wire, you see the machine guns, you see the trenches, the artillery in the back. And what would happen, whatever general, whether it be on the Allies or the Axis side, they'd go over the top, and what they meant by there was going up and over the trench, getting through the barbed wire, attacking the fortified enemy positions, and it ended up being a human meat grinder. With the advent of the machine gun, it could rapidly cut the advancing troops down. So what ended up happening for almost 3 to 4 years before the Americans got there is that one side would try to advance. They may even make a little gain, then the other side would counterattack, and it just ground down both Allies and Axis, the morale, the troops, into this no man's land, and really it was a stalemate for all these years. There was not much movement at all. The whole idea of rapid advancement just did not take place, and many of the generals in World War II cut their teeth in World War I, and they did not want to go through the trench warfare again. We looked at General Rommel, and what he started in World War II is this whole idea of the tank maneuvering, or the blitzkrieg. So the key part here in the trenches is really this no man land, where nobody wanted to be, hence the term no man land. Some of the weapons of the time, war does increase technology. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, the airplane, we read about Orville and Wilbur Wright, the very early part of the century. coming up with the whole inventing the airplane. Well, it didn't take too long to find the military applications of airplanes for reconnaissance, for bombing, for dog fighting. On the upper right, well, if you had airplanes, you had to have something to shoot them down. So in the upper right, we have the anti-aircraft batteries or anti-aircraft guns. In the middle of the slide is probably one of the most hated inventions of World War I, and that was the machine gun. There was something similar to this before called the Gatling gun. Briefly looked at it, but the machine gun was rapid fire. Took me a 2 or 3 man crew, and it just cut down many men as they were advancing over this whole idea of the no man's land. The lower left down there, well, if you couldn't try to get them out of the trenches and you couldn't get at them because they were well protected, well, the next thing was to try the poison gas, the chlorine gas and the mustard gas, a very infamous invention of World War I. And so troops had to be issued gas masks. Even all the dogs that were part of some companies had gas masks, and these were they worked for the most part, but they were very uncomfortable to wear, and a lot of times, they got thrown away as troops were moving and so forth. One of the big breakthroughs of World War I, and really kind of took care of the trenches, is the whole idea of the tank, and that's our bottom picture there. And this was a later invention. These could go through the barbed wire, could cross the trenches. The infantry would follow behind, and they would create a breakthrough. As I mentioned earlier, Rommel for the Germans in World War II, and Patton for the Americans in World War II, really proposed the large-scale use of tanks and their ability to maneuver and cover vast areas of ground very quickly. So these were some of the weapons that were, maybe if not truly invented, they were really they became much used and refined during World War I. And as you go through the 20s and the 30s, definitely became more refined as you got into World War II. Well, the Allied victories, we're going to look at, there wasn't really much going on. Well, I should say much going on, but wasn't much movement along the Western Front. As you can see from here, most of the activity took place in this area here. The Allies never really got into the German Empire at all. Everything took place on eastern France, if you will, and Belgium. You had this vast series of trenches, and the war was stalemated. It just kept grinding up troops from both sides. Well, when the Americans came in 1917, General Pershing led the American Expeditionary Force, which the Americans were called the Doughboys. And that term came from, they had the white belts, and they had a paste-type material they would use to clean the belts called dough, so hence the name of Doughboys. But General Pershing wanted the Americans to be independently led, and he knew they could not just stay in these trenches and just get ground up in the trenches. So he really proposed the whole idea of maneuver and mobilization. And a couple of the Allied victories at this time was the Second Battle of the Marne. You can see right down in here. And that was one of the bigger battles. Belleau Wood in this area here, and Chateau Thierry down in this area. And again, you're looking at 1918, so you're looking in the later parts of the war. And those are some of the great Allied victories led by the Americans at the time. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get into a lot of the specifics of the battles, but suffice it to say, once the Americans came over, they were not going to be stuck in the trenches, and they really looked for ways to maneuver and to mobilize their forces. Well, finally, you get into November 1918, after, well, for some of these countries, 4 years, maybe a little bit more than 4 years of just troops getting chewed up in no man's land. Nothing was going on. In November 1918, Austria-Hungary surrendered. About this time, German sailors and soldiers mutinied. Socialist leaders in Berlin established a German republic. Well, what was happening is people were tired of the war. You know, the citizens were, the soldiers were. There were a lot of political upheaval in these countries. In Germany, the whole idea of having a Kaiser and nothing to show for it, and people were just plain tired of the war. It's interesting to note, though, the Allies never invaded Germany, but Germany could just not keep going along with the war. And so at this time, they pretty much surrendered, and there was the war and armistice was signed on 11/11/18 at 11 a.m. And that essentially ended World War One. The cost of the war, and as you start looking at these numbers, all of Europe was really decimated by the ongoing conflict. And you can read some of these numbers here. The number of refugees, the number of deaths, many of them civilians. The cost in today's dollars, about $338 billion. The U.S. lost 48,000 men in battle. And again, the U.S. was not over there that long. And again, it just shows you the devastation on the battlefield. 62,000 died from disease. The sanitation was not good. The troops would be in these trenches. Disease would be rampant. Nowhere near the type of medicines that we had now, or even that they would have in World War II. The Americans also suffered 200,000 wounded. So we weren't over there very long, but there was quite a few casualties from this war. And that's our look at World War I.